Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 251, The Evil Eye, Thanatology, and Other Essays. This is a compilation of shorter works, but it is full length, it's 268 pages. Link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. There are also second and third links to my books blogs. You can get other academic materials of similar type as well. This particular compilation is mostly occult. There are a few sections in it that are more strictly medical. It's technically a work of medical history. But medical history is completely intertwined with the occult, so it sort of fits in. It's also got a lot of historical details about the Middle Ages, because a lot of the developments within medicine actually happened then, especially over the concept of dissection, which was considered to be haram within the context of Islam. It was banned by Christian groups as well. It was considered desecration. And so basically, other than certain pagan movements, you don't have a lot going on within medicine. And of course they were pushed to the side. It isn't until the Renaissance begins, really, that you get some degree of tolerance for such behavior. That's one part of this particular work. It also has an interesting passage on the development of groups like the Red Cross, ambulance services, and some of the more modern advents within medical services, delving into the medieval era, the High Middle Ages, and the Templars and some of their cohort groups essentially had begun to do similar services under the auspices of certain royal lineages or under the church at the time, which is interesting. But I think the two sections that are the most strictly occult are the first two, and those are the ones in the title itself. They're longer. The Evil Eye, that's self-explanatory. It's the history of this concept, derived especially from Italian tradition, although the basic concept of an evil eye arises in different cultures around the world pretty much simultaneously without an actual lineage. You'd be hard-pressed to find a culture that doesn't have the basic idea of a certain type of look in an occult or paranormal context, like flat-looking daggers at a person would be maybe a more secular equivalent. You'd be hard-pressed to find a culture that doesn't have that basic concept. Its lineage, at least in the European tradition, countermeasures to it within a medicinal context as well. The concept, of course, of suggestion and psychology, the mind intertwined with physical medicine at the time, very much in vogue at the dawn of the 20th century. Then you have Thanatology, a long-ish essay. Basically, it was initially a speech on the topic of what basically constitutes life itself. For example, single-celled life forms are considered life. Cells approximate them, although at the time this was less understood than it is now. The basic concept remains the same. Therefore, if you amputate a person's limb, the limb dies or withers. The person is still alive despite the fact that potentially a very large proportion of all of the living material amalgamated into them is gone. This goes into the topic of what is life. At what point is the person dead? How many of their brain cells have to be gone? If you slice a brain in half, if you slice a person in half down the middle, and each half is kept in a waking state, which one is the original person? What constitutes an individual being that can be said to possess life? To possess some sort of quality? What is the nature of the soul? That figures into it as well. It's a very interesting, deep, philosophical sort of passage. Then there are some parts of the work that are more straightforward history. It talks about the history of anesthesiology, which literally in that era terminates with the use of cocaine. The last thing that they speak about in this entire work, because this is the final section, is literally an advocacy for the continued experimentation of cocaine as a pain reliever. Now, I think it was only 10 years later that they finally realized, well, people are using it for non-pain relief purposes at this point. They're taking a few too many of those toothache drops. Maybe we should find something less narcotic. Then, of course, they start using they start using heroin in medicine, which is scarcely better. It's funny because they talked a lot about people who got addicted to the cocaine or to laudanum or something, but the heroin addict thing doesn't happen until later for the most part. Very, very interesting how that one escaped their notice, maybe for fiscal reasons. Now, but speaking about the development of laughing gas, the use of chloroform, the use of some of these gases in a medical context, again, It literally always overlaps with the occult, though. The fighting of the mainline church, I think it was specifically the Scottish church, against some of these developments within anesthesia, roughly mimics the fight of the church or certain religious orders, groups, or figures against various medical advents throughout history. It also talks about how surgeons, as a profession in the English tradition, literally comes from barbers, people who shaved heads, and bath keepers and some of these other traditions, bloodletters, and how the fact that you had throughout time a complex system of officially licensed guilds actually arguably held surgery back considerably for several centuries before some degree of modernity was allowed in. Again, this is a relatively full-length work, 268 pages. Link in the description of my edition on Amazon. It is a very good work. I enjoyed actually doing the second edit. I slowed it down a bit so I could read a bit more of it, specifically because it was so interesting, especially the history of surgery. And some of the military medical history involved is good as well. Again, second and third links are to my books blogs. You can find other medical history there. This one goes under the academic header. I was going to put it under the herbal and medical header, but it deviates so much from that and is so much more strictly history than it is practice. I had to put it under the academics because it is technically an academic work. Some of it is legitimately speeches given to medical assemblies. It's not really, similar to an herbal work. That's about all. Peace out.